Who was the 10th emperor of the Qing Dynasty and his constant battle for power? The Guangxu Emperor was the 10th emperor of the Qing Dynasty, and he lived from the 14th of August 1871 until the 14th of November 1908. He was also known by his temple name of Emperor Dezong of Qing, while before he became emperor by his personal name of Zaitian. He ruled from 1875 until 1908. His succession was endorsed by the dowager empresses Ci'an and Cixi for political reasons after Emperor Tongzhi died without an heir. Cixi held political power for most of Guangxu's reign as regent, except for the period between his assumption of ruling powers in 1889 and the 100 Days Reform in 1898. The prestige and sovereignty of the Qing dynasty continued to erode during the Guangxu Emperor's reign, with defeats in the Sino-French War, the First Sino-Japanese War, as well as the Boxer Rebellion. Guangxu engaged intellectuals such as Kang Youwei and Liang Yichao to develop the 100 Days Reform Program in 1898 in an attempt to reverse the decline. Among the goals was the removal of Cixi from power. However, the reforms were seen as being too radical for the conservative ruling elite, and it failed to garner the support of the army. Cixi rallied the opponents of the reforms and launched a coup, suppressing the reforms and reasserting herself in power. Guangxu lost his ruling powers and was placed under virtual house arrest at the Yingtai Pavilion of Zhongnan until his death of apparent arsenic poisoning in 1908. He died without an heir and was buried at Chongling in the Western Qing tombs. Accession to the throne and upbringing. The Guangxu Emperor was born on the 14th of August 1871 and given the name of Zaitian. He was the second son of Yushuan, Prince Chun. He was the nephew of Empress Dowager Cixi and a grandson of the Daoguang Emperor. On the 12th of January 1875, the Tongzhi Emperor, Zaitian's cousin, died without a son to succeed him. The Empress Dowager Ci'an and Cixi broke the imperial convention that a new emperor must always be of a generation after that of the previous emperor. Their reasoning being was that they wanted a candidate to take the place of the Tongzhi Emperor as a successor to the Xianfang Emperor, whose only son had been Tongzhi. Zaitian was not the only proposed candidate. The others in consideration were the sons of Prince Gong, Zaicheng and Zaiying, but they were of the same age group as the Tongzhi Emperor and were seen as having had a negative influence upon the late emperor. Zaitian, however, was younger than both of them and was a nephew of Cixi. His father, Prince Chun, was also liked more than Prince Gong for his being a scholar and a supporter of patriotic policies. On this basis, Zaitian was selected to become the next emperor. It was announced on the 13th of January 1875 that Zaitian had been chosen as the next emperor, with the co-regents being Empress Dowagers Ci'an and Cixi. He ascended to the throne on the 25th of February at the age of 4 and adopted the imperial name of Guangxu, meaning continuation of splendor. Thereafter, he was known as the Guangxu Emperor, and his personal name, Zaitian, was to be used no longer. In 1881, Ci'an, one of the young emperor's co-regents, died unexpectedly, leaving Cixi as the sole regent to the 9-year-old emperor, taking over the reins of power. During the Guangxu Emperor's reign, the Sino-French War erupted in 1884 over influences in what is today Vietnam. By the war's end in 1885, the French had destroyed the Chinese fleet at Fuzhou and were able to patrol the coast of southern China unobstructed, occupied parts of the island of Taiwan, and ended the status of Vietnam being a tributary of China. This prompted Great Britain to do likewise in Burma in 1886, and eventually the Japanese to do the same in Korea. The negotiations with the French were conducted by the Viceroy of Zili and other ministers in Beijing. The Guangxu Emperor had not given an audience to foreign diplomats in Beijing up to this point. On the 7th of February 1887, the Emperor was officially old enough to begin to rule in his own right, but the regency of Empress Dowager Cixi continued beyond that, and foreign diplomats were not informed of this detail. The French minister twice requested an audience with the Emperor in November 1887 and in the spring of 1888, but was denied on both occasions. By the end of 1887, the Guangxu Emperor began to rule, but under the close supervision of Cixi. Meanwhile, for the Empress Dowager preparing for her own retirement, Prince Cheng and the Grand Council prepared for the Emperor to rule directly by taking measures to ensure the system of rule remained intact. Eventually, in February 1889, in preparation for her retirement, Cixi arranged for the Emperor to marry. Much to the disliking of the Emperor, Cixi chose her niece, Jingfeng, to be Empress. She became the Empress Longyu. Cixi further cemented her control over the Emperor by installing two sisters, Jin and Zhen, to be Guangxu's concubines. The following week, with the Emperor married, Cixi finally retired in early March 1889. Early years in power. Even after the Guangxu Emperor finally began to rule, he found the power structure of the Qing court still depended upon Empress Dowager Cixi, and he was unsure how far his own authority extended. The Emperor began taking a leading role in the government, especially after Cixi began spending several months of the year at the Summer Palace from 1891, but Guangxu never became fully capable at skillfully managing the politics of the imperial court. The decisions made continued to be overseen by the Empress Dowager, while the Emperor attended the day-to-day state affairs. Any of the more difficult cases were taken by the Grand Council to Cixi for her advice. Cixi also had the final say on appointees to the Grand Council and the 6 ministries. Throughout his reign, the Guangxu Emperor was very frugal, and when he attempted to introduce some draconian measures to further reduce expenditure by the Imperial Household Department, which incidentally proved to be one of his few successes, it was met with opposition by some senior officials. Other efforts to reduce unnecessary expenditure meant the Emperor alienated some senior officials and potential allies who remained in close contact with Cixi. Foreign crisis. In the summer of 1894, the First Sino-Japanese War began with a struggle for influence in Korea. The Guangxu Emperor was reported as being in favor of a war against the Japanese, as he believed the Chinese would win easily. The Emperor's viewpoint was in stark contrast to that of Empress Dowager Cixi and Viceroy Li Hongzhang, who both preferred to look for a peaceful option. However, the conflict was an opportunity for the young emperor to make his own decisions instead of remaining under the influence of Cixi. The war began when the Japanese attacked and sank a Chinese warship on the 25th of July without a declaration of war. This incident led to ministers of the Qing Emperor advising him to declare war on Japan. War was officially declared 1 week later. China suffered heavy defeats across 2 days in September 1894, first at the Battle of Pyongyang, followed by defeat at the Battle of the Yalu River. The first incident destroyed the Hui army, followed by the naval loss of the Beiyang fleet. Both were considered the elite of the Qing's military. Angry at those defeats, the Guangxu Emperor wanted to go to the front lines to personally take charge of his soldiers, but his advisors managed to talk him out of that decision. Having met with a German military advisor who had been present at the Battle of the Yalu River, the Emperor learned exactly what happened. This suggested the Emperor didn't fully trust what he was being told by his ministers. He also signed edicts calling for the execution of generals that had been defeated. Throughout the war, although the Guangxu Emperor was the sovereign ruler of the Qing Empire, officials often ignored him and sent the messages to Cixi for her approval. Eventually, there were two sets of the Grand Council, one for the Emperor and another for the Empress Dowager. This practice continued until 1898. After a defeat to Japan in 1895, the Guangxu Emperor reportedly expressed his wish to abdicate. He wrote that by giving away Taiwan to Japan, as a peace treaty required, he was going to lose the unity of the people. The emperor felt he was unworthy because he failed as a leader. This was made worse when he was forced to give concessions to the European powers in 1897 to 98. Defeat in the war went a long way to the emperor deciding on 100 days reform in the summer of 1898 because he felt that drastic reforms were the only way to make up for his perceived failure. He had already written asking those with military knowledge to recommend reforms that could be made. Between 1895 and 1898, he had multiple meetings with Yuan Shikai. Yuan eventually came up with a plan to implement a Western-style army for the Qing. This would later become the basis for the Beiyang army. 100 Days Reform. I'm not going into too much detail about the 100 Days Reform, as I've already covered that in this video if you wish to learn more. Briefly, there was growing support for reform in China from the gentry and nobility in the spring of 1898, and for the emperor not to trust his ministers and to deal with the foreigners based in China on his own. 100 Days Reform was carried out from June until September 1898 in a series of sweeping changes, politically, legally, and socially, with the intention of making China into a modern constitutional empire. While a majority of the changes were initially accepted, they eventually came into conflict through Empress Dowager Cixi, who still effectively held the real power. Ministers removed from their positions through inefficiency went to Cixi for help. The Guangxu Emperor was accused of treason by asking the advice of the former Japanese Prime Minister Ito Hirobumi, who was visiting China at that time. The emperor was unable to defend himself from these allegations, and both sides began plotting against the other. On the 21st of September 1898, the emperor met with Cixi, and the following day he issued a decree that asked Cixi to take control of the government, while the emperor himself was placed under virtual house arrest. Any reform-minded officials that had supported the emperor were detained and replaced with more conservative-minded loyalists. An edit on the 26th of December undid most of the more radical changes made by the emperor, while others that did not go against the traditions of the Qing remained under house arrest. After the Guangxu Emperor was placed under house arrest, he was confined on Yingtai Island at Zongnanhui, which is located close to the Imperial Palace in Beijing. The Emperor was kept informed of current and state affairs, usually reading them with Cixi prior to their being read at an audience. The Emperor would be seated to the left of Cixi, her occupying the main throne, while the Emperor was seated upon a stool. Later in 1898, the health of the Guangxu Emperor began to deteriorate. This prompted Cixi to name Pujun, the son of the Emperor's cousin, the reactionary Prince Juan, as heir presumptive. After the Boxer Rebellion, Pujun and his father were removed from their positions within the royal court. Pujun was also examined by a physician and diagnosed with chronic nephritis. He was also discovered to be impotent. During the Boxer Rebellion, the Guangxu Emperor, Cixi, Empress Longyu, and other senior court officials fled from Beijing on the 14th of August 1900 as the armies of the Eight-Nation Alliance advanced on the city, and not returning to the capital until the 7th of January 1902. The remainder of the emperor's life was spent working on watches and clocks in his isolation, as well as reading extensively, passing the time until the eventual death of Cixi. Deaths of the Emperor and the Empress Dowager. The Guangxu Emperor died on the 14th of November 1908 at the age of 37, the day before the death of Empress Dowager Cixi. For a long time, there were several theories surrounding the emperor's death. none of which were fully accepted by historians. Most historians were inclined to believe that Cixi, herself very ill, poisoned the Guangxu Emperor because she was afraid he would reverse her policies after her death. A second theory was that the emperor was poisoned by Yuan Shikai, who knew that should the emperor come to power again, Yuan would likely be executed for treason. While these theories existed, there was no reliable proof as to who had killed the emperor. The medical records kept by the emperor's physician showed the emperor suffered from spells of violent stomach aches and that his face had turned blue, typical symptoms of arsenic poisoning. To dispel persistent rumors that the emperor had been poisoned, the Qing imperial court produced documents suggesting the Guangxu emperor had died of natural causes. However, this did nothing to dispel those theories already listed. On the 4th of November 2008, forensic tests revealed that the level of arsenic in the emperor's remains was 2,000 times higher than that usually found. Therefore, scientists concluded that the poison would have been administered in a single high dose. The Guangxu Emperor was succeeded by Cixi's eventual choice as heir, his nephew Puyi. The young emperor took the name Xuantong. After the Xinhai Revolution of 1911-12, the new Chinese Republic funded the construction of the tomb that would house the Guangxu Emperor in the Western Qing tombs. The tomb was robbed during the Chinese Civil War, and the underground palace or burial chamber is now open to the public. That brings us to the end of this video, highlighting the life of the Guangxu Emperor, a troubled life within the higher echelons of the Chinese society of the late 19th and early years of the 20th century. If you've enjoyed watching and it's shown you a little detail of life and events here in China, then your subscribing to my channel would mean a lot to me. Thank you for watching. Make sure you click on the link to the next video, and until the next time, goodbye for now.